and Zoning Commission to order. First order of business are the minutes dated August 20th. To ask if there's a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Second. Second. Any discussion, corrections, or addition to those minutes? Being none, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried, minutes approved. First item on the regular agenda today is a final plat. It's to consider a final plat for the Meadow Hills 5th Edition. The site is generally located in the northeast quarter, Section 29, Township 140 North, Range 96 East. Site's approximately 83 acres. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward. Give it your case.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Dave Thompson with Toman Engineering. I'm representing Cook McCormick Investment Properties. We have before you today is the final plat approval for Cook Meadow Hills 5th. We've been working with city staff trying to get everything done, and we are currently working on the developer's agreement for the project. We are asking for approval for the plat today, contingent on agreement or the completion of the developer's agreement. And we would like to continue, with the plat so we can continue working out on the area. Any questions?
This time I'd ask if anyone have questions at this time for Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Mr. Thompson a couple of questions?
Sure, Mr. Croton.
Mr. Thompson, on the submitted development agreement, how many of the conditions of the 20 are you in agreement as of today?
I believe we're in agreement with the majority of them. I think there's a couple outstanding ones.
Okay.
That we would like, we got the draft agreement, developer's agreement last Tuesday. And, we went through the developer's agreement, and we would like to have a face-to-face meeting with city staff to try and iron everything out and get everything agreed to.
Okay, thank you.
So you're not sure how many?
Well, I think there's two outstanding, according to talking with Mr. Colleen and Mr. Forsberg, our lawyer.
Okay, and which two are those?
I believe it's the is a contribution to the project that the developer will make, and also the downstream landowners.
Is the downstream landowners, is that an ongoing problem from a previous project?
Well, the perceived problem was from Cook's Meadow Hills, 1 through 4, which, when the plat was, the preliminary plat was approved, that was a condition that was put on, Cook's Meadow Hills 5th. They're kind of two separate, two separate owners, and, Cook's Meadow Hills 1 through 4, it has one owner. Cook's 5th has this, the partner is on Cook's 1 through 4, plus there's another partner on Cook's 5th, okay? And it is something we have done. We went in, modified our pond, and we're in discussion working with the city to try and satisfy downstream landowners.
But it doesn't matter who owns which property, all runs downhill, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's all one drainage way. There's main drainage way through there.
So what have you done with the other owners? If technically you say there's different owners to try to rectify the problem that exists so you don't contribute to it?
Well, we've been working with, we've had a meeting with downstream landowners, and we're working through the city to try to satisfy all downstream landowners, their concerns.
Any other questions at this time? Comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kubas?
to just touch on what Mr. Thompson was talking about, the payment for damages to downstream landowners. We've been meeting as city staff independently with the development group and with the downstream landowners. Recently, there's a dollar value in the development agreement right now of $15,000. I believe that number came from the development group. We've recently received some numbers, independent quotes that the downstream landowners have received, and I think we're off by probably a magnitude of 3 or 4. Right now, we have at least $50,000 worth of damage claims from downstream landowners. The dollar amount that was in the DA, like I said, was an amount discussed with the development group of $15,000. So there's quite a bit of difference there between the two parties. Just information for the board.
Thank you, Mr. Kubas.
Gentleman, Mike Cook, part of the owners of both of the developments. And I think Craig is right. This process has been going on since July of last year at the Planning and Zoning meeting when it was tabled with the conditions on it. And I think city staff has had 2 or 3 meetings with the landowners. We've kind of have stepped aside as a group and let the city try to do the negotiating just to get it to where they would be more willing to talk. And Mr. Soren also had several meetings with them. I think we never did get anything really back from them, but I guess the point is we've definitely been trying for over a year to get this settled. As Dave said, we've went in, we've remodified the pond, we've rip-rapped on the back, we've fixed fences that were there, we've redid the property lines between us. We've done about as much as we possibly can to try and clean up what is there, number one. Number two, I don't think it's ever been said or proven that we've done anything wrong. We did our pond according to what was designed the first time. We had the engineers redesign the pond, redesign the floodways. It all comes back to what it is right now. And obviously, when you've got 2 500-year water events that happen, communities do flood. I live on a river in Bismarck. Did I ever think my property would flood from the Missouri River? No. Yes, it did. I mean, things happen beyond our control, and it's not that we're not trying to get this settled, as Craig said. Secondly, when it comes down to the ownership of the 2 different entities, it's kind of a unique situation. Yes, I am owner of one, I am part owner of another, but it's 2 totally different groups that are trying to develop this, and we were trying to say that what happened with the downstream landowners should be something that should be settled off to the side of what's happening with Cook Meadow Hills Fifth. That's a totally different group that has done everything they're supposed to do to come in front of you guys and get our plat approved and try to move this project on. We've done our own stormwater stuff, we've done our own FEMA stuff, we've done our own everything that development needs to do to continue on. And again, trying to stop one development because of something that happened in the other one is really kind of an unfair situation, but we're dealing with it. And again, the point is it's all being negotiated. We only got the DA agreement, as Dave said, last Tuesday. We've been asking for it for 3.5 months so that we could keep this process moving. Weather is becoming a problem. Final hookups is becoming a problem. So again, what we're asking is, we're all so close to this, is to pass today under the terms that when it comes in front of the city commission, it would be the 3 items. final plat would be, or the DA agreement would be settled, the rezoning would be done, and the annexation would be done. We can do it all in one night. That gives everybody 3 to 4 weeks to get this done. If it doesn't happen, we just move on to the next commission meeting. It's in their hands. Nothing's really getting passed. We're just trying to get past the hurdle of you guys so that when everything does get settled, it doesn't delay everything another month. So that's kind of been our goal, and again, we're hoping to get this passed under those conditions so that we can all move on when the couple of items are taken care of, and we're pretty confident we're going to get it settled. So, any questions?
No, not this time. We're going to thank you for your perspective. Mr. Thompson, I mean, you're presenting this particular development. Your perspective of other property owners that can be affected by the runoff, by the presence of this development, irregardless of what's happened before in other projects. And how do you feel about how the way these stormwater runoff plans are presented and the engineers that do present them, when we have faulty plans, whose responsibility is it to go back and fix it?
Well, I do not think that we have faulty plans in that I was the one that did all the stormwater, just to let you know. Okay, I'm responsible for all the stormwater plans that were done for both Cook Meadow Hills 1 through 4 and Cook's Meadow Hills 5th. Okay. When we first submitted the stormwater plan for Cook's 1 through 4, it went to city engineer, you know, it was approved, and away we went with building permits and that. Since then, the city's asked us to go back and, I don't want to say revise, but review what was originally done, you know, for Cook's 1 through 4, the existing detention pond out there. I went through there, did everything according to, you know, city staff representatives, the way they wanted it done, and it still works. You know, it works according to the City of Dickinson ordinances. And then on top of that, we designed an additional detention pond upstream, you know, that is within Cook's 5th. Again, it was reviewed by the city, you know, with city direction. And in my opinion, right now, everything functions according to the City of Dickinson stormwater regulations.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? Can I have a quick question for Mr. Thompson? The pond that you've designed upstream in Cook's 5th, is that pond constructed yet?
It's in the process of being constructed.
Okay. And I would concur with Mr. Thompson that the pond that's in Cook Meadows 4th, I think it's in the 4th.
Yes, sir.
It does meet city ordinance. We've had a lot of back and forth. There was some, most of the back and forth in the redesign that Mr. Thompson is speaking about has to do with the flows, the calculations on the flows, and to match some FEMA numbers, because downstream this is a major drainage that makes its way all the way through town, and FEMA has a detailed study through town. So we needed to adjust our design flows. There's several ways to calculate the flow from a runoff, and we needed to match the FEMA flow so we don't change any of the flood elevations downstream. And that was the redesign that Mr. Thompson was talking about. So the pond right now does meet city ordinance. One thing that has been discussed with both the development group and the downstream landowners was that prior to the development, there was a stock dam on the same drainage, and oftentimes that stock dam held some of the low flows. If you had a small runoff, that stock dam may have been dry, it filled up, but the downstream landowners never really received the runoff. Right now, per our city code, we allow those low flows to pass through our ponds. We don't retain that water permanently. We just detain it temporarily. And one thing we've talked about, we haven't come to a consensus yet, would be to lower the elevation of the existing pond. And the hopes would be that this pond would most oftentimes be dry, and it would take some of that low flow runoff, fill up a couple feet of the bottom of that pond, and the downstream landowners wouldn't receive the continual runoff that we hear about now. So, just some things that we've discussed. There's nothing in the development agreement that touches on that specific detail, but there's an option there to help out with the retainage of some water in the pond.
I think the gist of all this is the fact that somewhere existing property owners downstream have to be protected from, every time there's a development in any place you go, water's going to run off faster, and it does cause a problem.
Yep.
And I think these problems came from previous development also before there was any 500-year occurrences of rain. It was happening before the huge rains we had this summer. And to try to find out what responsibility the developer feels they have or should have, or the city, or who's legally responsible for those damages. Some of it's very evident, and it's one thing that in planning that we would like to see taken care of ahead of time. And we are not in the position that where we would encourage, at this time anyway, civil action for people to recover damages from a plan that was approved by the city. And if there's engineering designs that are at fault or unpredictable, something that has happened that's not common in an area like this, that we'd like to see that there's some high level of concern for those property owners downstream, whether it's from this project or a previous project, because it all runs downhill. Like Mr. Kuba said, this goes to a FEMA plan all the way downstream. It runs all the way through Dickinson. And all those contiguous property owners going through that runoff, their concerns should be met.
Yep. And I totally agree with you, Mr. Chairman. It's not our intent to damage anyone downstream. You know, we've done everything that we can to minimize. You know, we've reduced the peak flows from development down to what the peak flows of the pre-development, or what was there before any development was done. And one thing, there is another subdivision that is contributing water to the downstream landowners. You know, it's just not us, but we're the ones, I don't want to be even blamed, but we're the one that the focus is on. There's a development directly to the west of these downstream landowners that their detention ponds come, hit our property, flow down, and then they almost flow to our exit of our detention pond and then go downstream. And no one's ever mentioned them, but I totally agree with it. It's not our intent to damage anyone. You know, we're trying to do things right. We've tried to work with city staff to correct whatever problems may have been there, and away we go.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Thompson this time? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this. Please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, Commission. I'm Janet Perkle, one of the downstream people that we've been talking about. I'm here again for the third time. Nice to see you all again. Some of the things I've listened to this morning waver on the edge of truth. Okay. What I've seen, and I have no idea what he's talking about, how he's reduced the amount of drainage. Those two pipes are still the same size. Nothing's changed about the amount of water. Yes, we had some major rains, but like Earl said, This was going on before we had the major rains. If you go up there today, there's water dripping through there today. We haven't had a rain since when? Okay, there's water going through there. There's silt going through there. I just have a problem with this development agreement, this N in here, as written. It is not adequate. The other thing, it does not state anything about, it's a one-time payment, we fix you up, and if you have any further damages, you're out of luck. Well, there's nothing in here saying that they are required, as Craig said, that we've been discussing, that they're required to fix that pond and do anything to make the water less. That is not in this agreement. The size of the outlets are still the same. The pond is in the same place, in the same depth, and it dumps directly onto Art Sickler's land. He's not here this morning, but I don't know, Mr. Cook was talking about repairs to fences. None of our fences have ever been repaired, so I don't know what fences he's talking about. The other item that had happened was, he said they put riprap. Yes, they did put riprap at the end of the pipe, but without Art's knowledge, Art has two fences for his horses. He had an original fence, and then he put another fence 3 feet back into his property because he didn't want his horses reaching over. They took down his fence and put the riprap on Art's property without his consent and knowledge. That's how they were fixing the problem. You know, these items are happening, and they're saying they're doing the best that they can. They're out there doing the least that they can. And I just want the commission to know that. And so I have a problem with this agreement. I don't think it should be approved as far as without that item N really being approved by everybody in agreement on our part. I didn't know about this until yesterday. So how can you approve something and say we're in agreement when we don't even know about it? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Perkle. This time I'd ask if there's anyone else in public who'd like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward.
Earl, Commissioners, I'm Dean Kubis. I live downstream from this. Through this past summer, anytime we had inch or 2 inches of rain, they've got 2 culverts where it dumps out. I got one over here. My land gets totally flooded. I've got dead trees. I've got, I know my fence is going to have to be replaced. And I believe the developer needs to pay for all this stuff. I know what time I get done, my damages, if it's, I bet it's going to be $75,000 to $100,000. And I don't feel I should have to take the hit for that. And if you guys approve this, which I don't think you should, he needs to take care of this stuff before he goes further. That's how I feel. Because if you don't force him to do it, he won't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. This time I'd ask if there's anyone else in the public who wish to make comment, please feel free to come forward. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jackson.
first of all, I'd like to ask Mr. Croton, Mr. Coling, am I correct in saying that this board doesn't take formal action on the DA? Is that true? That's City Commission?
Normally, that's not the case. However, this is an amending of the original conditions of approval. As you noticed, as part of the staff report, there are certain conditions that would preclude them from getting any building permits that were originally established, such as State Avenue to be constructed. This is a process to allow potentially 30 units on and still meet the conditions of approval. From staff's perspective, I think this DA has to be agreed upon in order for us to support that. It's not to be kicked down the road to the City Commission. It needs to be agreed upon. Otherwise, I would not recommend approval of it.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say that staff feels this board should
Absolutely.
Say yea or nay. Okay.
Yes. Those are the conditions for us to essentially amend some of the conditions as part of the preliminary plat in order for the final plat to move forward. Normally, you come in and you address the conditions, and then the development agreement is approved as part of the final plat, but we are essentially amending the preliminary plat with some of the conditions to allow them to develop early prior to State Avenue being constructed next year.
The situation with the drainage, you know, it's pretty apparent to me that the two parties probably aren't going to come together. I think in the end, whether it's this board or city commission, the city is going to probably have to make a call and move on. And, you know, maybe neither party will be satisfied with what that is. I don't know. I want to see the plat move forward because there are a large number of R1 lots in here that we need. So I really want to see it move forward, but it can't move forward until we have this resolved one way or the other. And if this board has to pass on that, then I don't think we're ready. You know, if it were going to city commission, then I would be open to approving the plat contingent on successful approval of the DA. But if we are the ones that have to approve the DA, then I don't think we're ready.
It's not, let me clarify that point. You don't approve, this commission is not approving the DA, but in order for staff to feel comfortable, the development agreement needs to be agreed upon. And we feel that after 9 months of meeting with the applicant, almost every single week, these conditions are 95% engineering. They met with staff, that if there still is a gap, there still isn't an agreement after 9 months, why should we move forward with this? This issue should be resolved at this meeting before it goes to city commission. That's from my perspective. Now I'd like to get the attorneys and also the city engineer.
Mr. Kubas.
To speak towards the engineering, we focus a lot on the stormwater, and rightfully so. A lot of the 9 months worth of meetings are about streets and water and sewer, and so we have had a lot of meetings, and the stormwater is continually the stumbling block. It's a big issue. Those streets interior to the subdivision don't affect anyone else. That runoff does. And I think there's 2 points that I'd like to make. I don't think we can differentiate this subdivision from past subdivisions, Cooks 1 through 4, because of the stormwater and the drainage. It enters one subdivision, the prior ones, the built ones, then it enters into Cooks 5th, and then it comes back into Cooks 4th, and then goes to the downstream landowners. So it's really tightly woven together. You can't separate the two. The water comes from one, goes to the other, and comes back in. The plan as submitted for Cooks 5th, you know, will tie in, and it all works together with the pond that's in Cooks 4th. And that plan will meet our ordinance. Like Mr. Thompson said, the pond upstream hasn't been fully constructed yet in Cooks 5th. They are working on that development. We've approved the engineering drawings for that development. One thing that I think it's become clear to me, we've all thought about this project and studied it a lot as staff over the last several weeks, several months, is that, well, one, the water has the right to go downstream. That's where it went before. Per our ordinance, we're limiting that to the pre-existing flows. I think that the damages in my mind that we need to really focus on is that you don't have the right for siltation to come off your property, no matter what. If you have an existing lot in town and you till up the grass because you're going to reseed new lawn, and we get a big rain and it washes into your neighbor's yard, it's still your responsibility. You didn't break any laws, you didn't break any ordinances by tilling up your yard, but you're still responsible for that. You made an action, and there was a rain that caused an effect, and it's your responsibility to clean that up. So what I'm trying to focus on is really, you know, what is the damages that was caused by the runoff? And to me, it's the siltation. Could it have been some fences too? Yes. Could it have been some trees? Yes. But the water continuing to run through there, I think we need to understand that it's been very wet. There's water running many places right now through fields that are undeveloped, and it hasn't rained in quite a while. So the siltation, I think, like Commissioner Jackson said, we have some numbers now from the landowners that they've gotten independent quotes from. We'll work diligently as a staff to come up with that agreement, but right now, we're far off in those numbers. So if we feel we need to today have concurrence on the development agreement, I don't think we're there, strictly speaking, to the stormwater and damages to downstream landowners.
Thank you, Mr. Kuvis. Mr. Colling, did you want to make any comments?
Yes, specifically, I think with respect to the plat approval and the approval of the DA, as Mr. Corton said, this board does not take formal action on approving the development agreement. That is the province of the City Commission to approve that or disapprove it. One of the conditions, though, on the preliminary plat was that the final plat would be contingent upon approval of a development agreement. At this point, we don't have a development agreement negotiated out with the landowners. I think we'll get there. As Mr. Jackson said, as a city, we want this project to happen. There's a lot of R1 housing on it. The developer obviously wants this to happen, so I think eventually we will get to a development agreement that both sides can be comfortable with. I believe what you have in your packets is the proposal that we have made to the developer on this development agreement. We did get some comments back from them, and I just wanted to note a couple of few areas of disagreement of things that we need to work out in this, and there are several of them. Just on page 2, paragraph 4C, there's a provision there that necessary offsite improvements would be subject to approval of the city engineer. The developer has requested that the only offsite improvements that would be required would be at Maryland Street and Wall Road. I believe there are some additional stormwater improvements that we would be asking them to complete off-site. The next page, there's some language in there about the construction of State Avenue. One of the conditions on the preliminary plat was that the final plat would not go forward unless State Avenue was constructed. Obviously, State Avenue is not going to get constructed this year. We're still working through some right-of-way and anticipate that we'll have the right-of-way and be able to construct State Avenue next year. But approval of this plat at this time with the development agreement would allow the developer to go forward with the construction of some of their development, about 30 dwelling units, notwithstanding the fact that State Avenue is not constructed yet. We'd also talked with the developer about the developer's contribution to State Avenue, whether that comes in the form of special assessments or actual cash contributions or contributions in kind to State Avenue. The number that is in this development agreement is $1.3 million, a little over that. The developer has requested a lower amount than that, so we'll have to talk with them about that. Also, the timing of the contribution and the method in which that happens, whether that's special assessments or contributions in kind, needs to be worked out. We do need to talk with them about the dedication of the right-of-way. I understand that in the event that the city would require a contribution from the developer for State Avenue, that the developer would like to be paid for the right-of-way in State Avenue. It's a mile-long section or half-mile-long section, rather, that the developer owns. So if the city is required to pay for that right-of-way, that's a fairly substantial cash outlay that the city would have to acquire that right-of-way. the stormwater detention facilities, Mr. Kubis had referenced. I understand, I don't think Ms. Marshig is here yet. She has been kind of the point person for us on stormwater and getting the conditional letter of map revision and the letter of map revision for FEMA paperwork. I understand some of that is still not finalized at this point. So we do need to work with FEMA or have the developer work with FEMA to make sure that that paperwork is in order for the stormwater system. Annexation of the property is still something that is outstanding. The developer has requested annexation. That was going to go forward at the City Commission meeting on Monday, and because of the outstanding issues, the developer did request that the City Commission not take action on the annexation until after this meeting, until we have some resolution of the development and the development agreement and some other issues. The settlement with the landowners is an issue. It's paragraph N on page 5. You've heard from the landowners about that. As Mr. Kubis said, I think we're several orders of magnitude away from finalizing a number as to what the landowners may have for settlement. And whether or not that gets incorporated into this development agreement or that's a separate agreement that the previous developer needs to make with the landowners, I think is something that we'll have to talk about too. We did have some discussion with the landowner about dedication of a lot for a water booster station. And I had understood from some of the previous discussions the developer was in agreement with dedicating some land for a water booster station. I did notice in the comments we received back from the developer, they did cross that paragraph out on the dedication of the water booster station, so that may be something we need to sit down and talk with them about as well. Paragraph P on page 5 states that the developer will complete a punch list of items that remain outstanding for the Cook Meadow Hills first, second, third, and fourth edition. The developer did cross that out in their comments. I think most of those punch list items may be completed at this point, but we'll have to get with our engineering staff and make sure that has been done as well. We do have a lift station, a sewer lift station within Cook Meadow Hills 4th edition. As I understand it, our engineering plan was that when State Avenue is constructed, that lift station would be decommissioned. And I think that's still an outstanding issue with the developer. Paragraph Q on page 5, I understand the developer has eliminated that section. And with that lift station, it's my understanding from engineering staff that we've been requesting as-built plans for that lift station. That's not a city lift station at this point. But we have not received those at this point, and I'm not sure whether or not we have taken that over on maintenance. Mr. Zuroff or Mr. Kubis may know better than I on that. Paragraph R on page 5, we had requested that the developer install streetlights and mailboxes within the development. The developer has indicated in their comments to this that they do not intend to install streetlights within the development. So that's something we'll have to talk with them about. Paragraph S deals with a special assessment district for streetlights in Cooks 1 through 4th. We are going through some engineering process on completing streetlights within those subdivisions. We'd ask that the developer cooperate with the city in establishing that street lighting district. The developer has eliminated that within their comments to this development agreement. There are some negotiation will have to be done regarding the relocation of utilities within State Avenue. As I understand, the developer is intending to connect utilities from Cook's 4th across State Avenue into Cook 5th. Those utilities will have to be taken out once State Avenue goes through. The major water and sewer lines will go right down State Avenue. We'll have to talk with the developer here about who pays for the relocation of those lines, as well as we're going to have to work around those lines if there are houses that are connected to them in the construction of State Avenue. Paragraph 5 on page 6 contains some standard language that we've had in our development agreements with respect to developers posting bond or other security for the completion of their infrastructure. Our ordinance states that that is at the amount of 130,000, or excuse me, 130% of the projected costs. The developer has requested that that be at 100% of the projected cost of the infrastructure. On the next page, there is some language about the acceptance of infrastructure. The developer has requested that the city would accept the infrastructure within 60 days of completion of the work. I'm not sure the city is going to be able to agree to that. We did have some issues with respect to acceptance of the infrastructure in Cooks 1 through 4th, and they're not the only development. There are other developments around that that we've had issues with respect to accepting the infrastructure. Particularly in the environment we're in, it's difficult for city inspectors to get out and inspect the progress of construction as it happens. So we typically need to go back after it's constructed and make sure that it's been constructed to spec. And that usually takes a longer period of time than the 60 days that the developer has requested here. Additionally, on the next page, page 8, there's a paragraph with respect to title to public improvements. This development agreement states that the owner is going to maintain ownership of the stormwater detention facilities. The owner in their comments has crossed that provision out. So I think we'll have to talk about whether those stormwater facilities are going to be maintained by the city or whether that's going to be an HOA or some other organization maintained by the owner. Paragraph 13 is with respect to a maintenance warranty on the infrastructure that the developer constructs. For several years now, we have asked that the developers of infrastructure provide the city with a 1-year maintenance warranty. Usually after 1 year, we have a pretty good idea as to whether or not the infrastructure is in good shape or not. The owner in their comments has indicated that they don't intend to provide a maintenance warranty for the infrastructure, but that they would allow or ask that their contractors provide that maintenance warranty to the city. And then the last one is paragraph 14, stating the agreement runs with the land. Our intent with these development agreements is that once we have a developer that comes in with a project, we have a development agreement that entitles the developer to a certain development expectation. It doesn't necessarily mean the developer will develop that property. They could just as easily sell that to another party and convey the property. And our intent is that the limitations and the restrictions that we put on developers in these agreements run with the land, that any future purchaser is similarly bound to the agreements that the developer makes here. And the developer in their comments here has asked that that provision be removed from this agreement. I think that's a brief overview of some of the issues that we are going to have to discuss with the developer. As I said, I think we'll get to a resolution on all these issues. We want the project to happen. The owner wants the project to happen. But there is probably a significant amount of work that is going to need to be done in order to negotiate those points out. And at this point, we just haven't had the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Coling. Mr. Kubas, I had a question on how comfortable you feel in being a mediator, so to speak, and speaking with the parties about the damages that do exist and that have occurred over the last couple of years. Do you feel comfortable talking with the parties at this time? Do you think you're getting headway? Or do you think it's going to be drug out and have to progress to some civil action or some city responsibility? Or do you think you can come to terms with both parties that they can agree to?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that right now, in my discussions with both parties, that they'll be able to come to a dollar amount that's agreeable to both parties. at that point, I think the city would need to become the arbitrator and make a ruling per se, if that's the direction that the city wants us to go, and take both sides of the story, and using some engineering judgment and the prices that we know exist today to do, dirt work in Dickinson or in this area, make a call, and I would be comfortable making that call. I don't know that either party would agree with the number, but I would be comfortable to make that determination.
Thank you. Because in my perspective, from what I've heard from Mr. Coling and Mr. Curtan and yourself, and I've always said, we started this 4 years ago when we worked on the comprehensive plan, that there's nothing here in Dickinson or Stark County that we should have to do that's going to make the place worse than it was or damage people. There's no reason that we should endorse a project unless it makes Dickinson better. Otherwise, there's really no point in doing it. And right now we have quite a mess. And I am going to give you a little personal perspective, because I am dealing right now myself with an oil company on 5 different projects. 3 of the projects are the same oil company, but yet they're come under 3 different divisions. I talked to one person, they say, oh no, I'm only this division. Talked to another one, they say, oh, I'm only this division. And I talked to the third one just 2 days ago, and they're coming out to see me tomorrow. They say, they're from a different division. And I said, guess what? You guys better get your division together, because nobody's going to do anything, from my perspective, unless this isn't all agreed upon by all parties and done right. The excuses that parties are separate, but from a plumber's butt's perspective, it all goes downhill. And I think that that's imperative that everybody is respected in what we do here and how we look at this. This project affects a lot of people. We need the housing, there's no doubt about it. We need those single-family dwellings, but we need to do it right. The city's looking at incurring a whole lot of expenses here, or perspective of expenses, that haven't even been yet agreed upon. If now we throw in another party, Cook's Fifth with Fourth, there's a whole lot of not agreeing upon how we're going to do it and who's going to pay for it. And money is a big perspective here in paying for damages and future infrastructure, roads. This I don't think can go forward without these agreements. And I think we've heard from 3 professionals here at the table, Mr. Curtan, Mr. Kubas, and Mr. Coling, and giving us a very good perspective. And I believe the intent of this commission here is that, yes, we'd like to see it go forward, but it's got to be done right. So at this time, I'd ask if there's any other commission would like to make comment on this while we still have public comment.
Mr. Chairman, I've got one more comment.
Mr. Jackson.
And first of all, after hearing the litany of items from Mr. Coling, I can see why Mr. Curtan feels that we shouldn't go forward, and I would agree. There's one other thing, and I'd like to hear from Mr. Cook about this. There are 2 streets left in Meadow Hills 3rd or 4th that aren't paved yet. I'm not going to be in favor of this going forward until those streets are paved. Those are the 2 short streets on 40th, coming off of 40th.
First off, I'd like to say a few things about, again, tying the 4th division with the 5th division.
Mr. Cook,
just not.
would you
I
please
would like
answer
my
his...
opportunity to.
Mr. Question.
I will.
No.
I will.
Answer his question now while we got it fresh in our mind, please. And then we'll let you make comment.
The discussion has been talked with Mr. Cubis, and we were going to, I think the last time we talked about it, put a separate agreement together that we would agree to pave those when 40th came in. You want to pave now, we'll pave them. We've offered that to Craig at one time before. And I think, Craig, wasn't it kind of left that we would put in an agreement that we would agree to pave those once 40th was determined what elevation they were going to go in?
My recollection of that conversation was that you had anticipated doing some paving in Cook's Fifth, and you said when you'd have a paver out there, you'd pave it.
If you wanted it done.
Correct.
Okay. If not, you were going to put a separate agreement. You know, that's the thing. We're up here and we're getting badgered about things that we didn't or didn't do, and it's just kind of sad to listen to all this stuff about we've done nothing. We've had these discussions with Craig. And again, is there anything that our developing could do with the drainage right now that is going to change anything that's going to happen? Is there anything? Have we not given you everything that is going to, that ponds cannot change, correct?
The pond in Cook Fourth or
The
Cook Fifth?
ponds in Cook Fourth, the ponds in Cook Fifth, it's all been decided by your team, by FEMA, and by our team. There is no more changes that can happen to it, right?
The only change is the change I discussed earlier, of lowering the elevation of the pond in Cook.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think we were told that that is out of the question. You guys don't want to lower it because of a liability hazard. And again, we've discussed it, we've offered to do it, we have emails that said we've offered to do it. I just don't get what everybody's trying to do here. It's sad, it really is. All of these things have been worked with our team. We've done everything we possibly can. We've spent money, we've re-spent money engineering, we've done everything that you have asked of us to do. Bottom line, the ponds can't change. They're done, they're finished. It's what we have to accept, and there's nothing we can do about it. I think your team has already said that, so I don't get what the pond or stopping it has to do with either of these developments, because there's nothing more we can do to them. The engineers have all said this is it. It's into
Mr. Chairman,
FEMA. FEMA
Mr.
has
Cook.
wrote a letter
Yeah.
that it's
If I could, Mr.
done.
Cook.
Mr. Cook?
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Cook answered my question about the two streets, and, you know, whether they're paved or there's an agreement that's satisfactory to staff, either way, just so it's taken care of. That's all I wanted to know. So it's taken care of. The rest of this, obviously, you're going to have to take care of with staff. There's no sense doing this today.
Well, one other thing with Mr. Coling and the DA agreement, our attorney sent out an email yesterday morning. It's not like we're not trying. We asked that he at least give a phone conversation before this meeting. Half of what he said has all been agreed to by us. Obviously, the conversation didn't happen. We have asked for a staff meeting of any time. I think Scott gave 3 or 4 or 5 days of what he's available to come down and have a face-to-face and get this hammered out. But it just, you know, it's amazing. I'm sorry, it's just amazing. What is it going to hurt to timeline this thing and pass it contingent on final approval by the city commission? It's no different. All you're doing is saving some time for annexation, which we all want and need, for the project to continue, which we all want and need. We still are not going to get the final plat approved unless it goes through the city commission. So what difference does it make? If we stop now, then we got to come and wait and go next month. Then we got to wait 3 more weeks to go in front of the city commission meeting. You're into November. Well, then the project might as well just stop and be done with. At least we can continue on. You still are not passing it until it goes to the city commission meeting. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any other comments from the commission? If being none, I'll close the public portion of this hearing, and I would ask Mr. Croton for a recommendation.
I still stand by my prior statement. I would recommend a continuance until the issue is resolved. You as a board can make a decision if you want to move forward with that and and allow the city commission to ultimately make the decisions. But, you know, based upon where we're at, communications we've had, there is a wide gap with respect to conditions on the DA. I think it's appropriate to have those issues resolved, but it's your call if you want to recommend approval and leave it up to the city commission.
Thank you, Mr. Patton. At this time, I would ask for a motion.
Mr. Colling, would the proper motion be to continue or table or what?
Commissioner Jackson, if you so wish, I think, excuse me, I think the proper motion would be to continue the matter until the October Planning and Zoning meeting.
I'll make that motion.
The motion to continue, is there a second? A second by Mr. Ballesteros. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just
Yeah,
think,
Mr.
you know, this board, I think, has a responsibility when it sends its recommendations to City Commission to more or less send a finished product, and I just don't think we're there yet.
I concur with Ms. Jackson. I think that's why we're here, was because even we're here to take care of a lot of the dirty work, so to speak, and we should send a clean product on to the City Commission. Any other discussion? If not, being all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Shall be continued. Item 2 on our regular agenda is a final plat. It's to consider a request for a final plat of Buffalo Bend subdivision. The site is generally located in the northeast quarter of Section 3, Township 139 North, Range 96 West. The property is approximately 4.44 acres. This time I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering and Surveying, representing the owner of Buffalo Bend subdivision. To give you a little history on this project, this was brought forward last summer as a preliminary plat. At that time, there was some concerns with the infrastructure that we were tying into with the sewer not being adequate. Since that time, we've been told that we do have adequate infrastructure, so we are back with this final plat now to get this subdivision going. If you recall, this is a R2 subdivision. There's going to be a mixture of duplexes as well as single-family development that the owner is planning. The duplexes will be located closer to 10th Avenue with the Highland Valley Road there. The single-family would be further back towards the west side of the subdivision. We did have a couple of very minor changes to the plat. We have widened some easements per utility company requests, and we did shift one lot line about 5 feet between 10 and 11. Otherwise, this is the same plat you saw last summer. We did look at the staff recommendations. We have no issues with those, and I believe they have, for the most part, been addressed. We do have approved civil plans and approved stormwater reports. Park fees have been paid, and we do have a subdivision agreement included with this application as well to meet those staff recommendations. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address those at this time.
Any questions for Mr. Schrank at this time? I just had one question, Mr. Andrew. The fire department on the cul-de-sac, is that, what do you, if they're all in agreement with that?
Yes, this does meet.
Okay?
Yep, this will meet the International Fire Code that the fire department follows. It will have the required diameter that they require. So,
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Schrank.
thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward. This time I'd ask Mr. Josephson if he'd like to make a comment or recommendation.
Steve Josephson, city planner. When this originally came in front of the City Planning and Zoning Commission back in March of last year, there were two conditions. One was prior to adoption of the final plat, a final stormwater management plan shall be reviewed and approved by the city engineer. And prior to adoption of the final plat, a final subdivision agreement shall be approved by the city. The applicant has had a stormwater plan that's been approved. City staff has reviewed the development agreement, and we're fine with it. So staff recommends approval of the final plat, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Josephs? Thank you very much. Any other comments from the commission? This time we'll close public portion. I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Kovach.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the Buffalo Bend subdivision final plat as depicted in attachment A, as meeting all the requirements of Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion? Second. A second by Mr. Frederick. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Recommend final plat. Thank you very much. Item 3 on our regular agenda is a preliminary plat. It's to consider a preliminary request for a, is to consider a request for a minor subdivision plat. Is that correct? Am I reading this correct? Okay. For the Southwest View subdivision, the site is generally located in the southwest quarter of Section 11, Township 139 North, Range 96 West. The site's approximately 20 acres. And at this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, Committee Chairman and committee members. My name is Virgil Schofield. I'm working with Forsgren Associates with Mr. David Shetler on his minor subdivision plat. We submitted this a preliminary plat, and we had made some changes to this per the comments that were received. Some of the things have been changed on here with right-of-way dedication that was required, and also adding of some easements. The plat hasn't changed much from what you had in the original packet, but we're just, I'm here to answer any questions and just looking for approval to continue with this and present it to the city.
Do you know, do all 4 lots have prospective builders on them or not?
Prospective builders?
Or is someone going to build on this property?
As I'm just doing the survey, I'd have to
Okay.
defer that to the owner.
Oh, that's fine.
Shetler. I'm just the survey.
You're just the survey, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's fine then, sorry.
It's all right.
Any questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I had one comment on the access easement that was shown, and I know the comment was forwarded on to Forsgren as well, but was this a prior platted easement or recorded easement somewhere? If not, if the intent of it is just creating an easement, I was wondering if it could be squared up a little bit. If there was ever a dispute on this easement down in the future, down the road sometime, this kind of a tough easement to retrace with surveying. Not a difficult, but time-consuming. If this could be squared up, that might be helpful.
I couldn't agree with you more. But the conditions that exist out there along the Hart River, because of the slope over there, that's as far towards the river as that easement could be.
So it was an elevation-based.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Any farther north than that is to have any type of driveway through there would be impossible, just because of the conditions on the bank there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to make comment on this preliminary plat. Feel free to come forward, please.
Morning, Chairman and board members. I'm Al Heitz, the Stark County Road Superintendent. I did meet with Mr. Shetler out there, and Mr. Kubus, when you're talking about squaring that corner up, is that in Lot 1, that corner?
I was talking about squaring the easement up,
Oh, I
that
see.
dashed easement
Okay.
through the, kind of the northwest corner of the plat. I know the right-of-way that was taken there, the easement was there for that
Right,
kind of
okay.
flared intersection.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd intersection, the corner there, but like I said, I did meet with him and looked at his access points, and I think they're fine. You know, where he wants access and shared lots, it's always good to share approaches instead of having so many of them, but, you know, I don't have any problem with approaches, so. And I think it kind of fits in with, because there's development right to the east side of it and across the road, so that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser. Any other comments? At this time, I'd ask for comments from Mr. Josephson, City and County Planner.
Steve Josephson, City County Planner. This is a proposal to plat a lot that's approximately 20 acres. The minimum lot size zoned agriculture is 5 acres, and they wanted to take advantage of that and split that into four 5-acre lots. There were a number of issues that we had. This went through staff review. And, you know, based upon some of the things that were identified, we're recommending approval based on the following conditions: that the route identified on the plat map as Broadway Street shall be renamed 10th Avenue Southeast; to identify in the plat map the person, business, or parcel of land that will be using the easement depicted on the plat map. According to the applicant's representative, that's an easement to the applicant's house. They want to be able to come through that. It's an existing easement, but they still need to call that out on the plat map, that it's for their use. Also, based upon the comprehensive plan, there's some plans in that eventually the roads will be expanded in that area, although it's in the ETZ, the extraterritorial zone right now. Should that ever come into the city, those roads may require expanding, as I believe they're identified as, potential collectors in the future. So the city is asking the developer be required to dedicate 40 feet of right-of-way adjacent to 8th Street Southeast, and also that they be required to dedicate 17 feet of right-of-way on the western portion of Lot 1 adjacent to 10th Avenue Southeast. Speaking to the applicant's representative, they're going to revise their plat so that to include a little more land, so that each of those lots after the dedications will still be 5 acres each. They have, as Mr. Heiser stated, they've met with him for access. The access to Lot 1 will actually come off of 10th Avenue Southeast, and then 2 and 3 will share an access point, and then 4 will share an existing access point. There are some wetlands on the northern portion of this that are pretty much going to limit development potential on that. So you'll see any development to the south of that easement. Staff has reviewed this and recommends approval based upon those conditions. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
In the past, we've discussed properties in the ETZ, of what size those lots should be. You know, will they 5 acres, 4, 3? There's been some discussion, you know, in the future and what can be on those. Are these, in the ETZ, are they going to be allowed to have animals on this property?
Our ag does allow for that, and they would have enough land. You're limited, I don't have it in front of me right now, but the number of animals is limited by the amount of land that you can have. Now, what the applicant has indicated is that they plan to use these for residential. They plan to use these for residential lots.
Okay.
5 is the minimum under the ag zoning. And one of the things I also want to point out is this is an area in the ETZ where the city doesn't envision any expansion of services. There's been no discussions of any annexations into that area. And given what's in that area, there's a fair amount of wetlands, and then you've got the lagoons to the north, to the north of there. think there's some limitations in terms of, expansion of the urban service area at this time.
So the future doesn't look like they're going to be surrounded by residential, apartments,
Not,
any other type of facilities?
we don't have the infrastructure to serve that area.
And the future of the lagoons?
I don't know the future. I guess that's a Gary Zuroff, question unless Mr. Kubis knows what's going to happen to the lagoons. I was under the impression that we were still going to use the lagoons along with the advanced wastewater treatment plant, and Craig's given me a look, so.
I don't have the exact answer, but some of those lagoons, we have 4 right now, one or more may be kept in service as overflow emergency use. A couple of them will probably be decommissioned, but the land itself there, I don't see the land use changing from what it is now.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Josephson?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jackson.
So Steve, there's going to be dedication on both the south, on the south border along the section line, and then on the west side?
That's
Is that
correct.
correct? Okay.
Right.
And we're okay then dealing with this as a minor subdivision?
Yes, the intent of the dedication, as it's written in there, is if you're going to dedicate land for new roads or easement for new roads, then that would rise to being a major subdivision. In this case, it's already served by roads, but because of our comprehensive plan, we want to have that land dedicated in case sometime in the future those roads as depicted in the plan are going to be constructed.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
One
Mr.
quick
Lewis.
comment or question for Mr. Josephson. On the naming of streets, right now the plat as it shows Broadway. Sometimes this is referred to Livestock Lane. If Dickinson were to expand, it might become 10th Avenue Southeast. The east-west street is shown as 8th Street, which is the continuance of 8th Street in Dickinson. I think it might be 38th Street in Stark County. As Mr. Josephson said, there isn't any imminent plan for annexation or the city growing out towards this portion of the ETZ. I wonder if it might be more appropriate to leave street names off, as it might be confusing down the road if we're showing city street numbering when it very well could remain in the county for years and years, well past the development of this subdivision. So it might be cleaner. I don't know what the policy is on naming or not naming streets on the subdivision plat, but it might be appropriate to leave those off to limit the confusion.
Mr. Kubis, I'd have to look at chapter 34, but I believe they're supposed to show street names on there, on the plats.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Josephson. This time I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kovash.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend preliminary approval of the minor subdivision plat for the Southeast View subdivision as being compliant with the Dickinson Comprehensive Plan and not meeting all requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and being contrary to interest of public health, safety, welfare, and subject to the following conditions. Is that right? That doesn't look right.
You want the one before that.
I was gonna say. But it says approval.
Yeah. Oh, that's my mistake. Compliant, it should be compliant and remove the not covered.
Okay.
We can take your words today, Mr. Kovash, whatever you
I-
feel, however you want to word it.
As I was reading it, it
We'll
didn't
take
make a
it.
lot of sense for approval, but, so whatever we need to do to change it, I vote
I
to
can't
approve.
explain that not, my bad.
Is there a second to that? There's been a second by Mr. Friedrich. Any discussion?
Mr. President.
Mr. Colling.
We'll allow the minutes to reflect approval of the subdivision as compliant.
Thank you. One thing I had to say was the question on the roads is probably an engineering and a recording thing, but I would suspect that if in the future if someone does build there, 911 or emergency people are going to identify that property in some way, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Where do they draw from? Do they draw from the recordings the city will put down? Or is it going to be the county? Whose information are they going to get?
That's a good question. Typically, what we tell people, tell people when they get their addresses is they contact 911 to get them. I mean, certainly we've had plats where road names have changed over time. Go back and look at some of the plats that are 20 and 30 years old, and the road name on there at the time of adoption differs in some cases. So,
Okay.
Which, Mr. Chairman, to me is a reason to agree with Mr. Kubitz to leave them off the plat.
okay, I'll look at chapter 34, and and if that's the case, then we can so instruct the applicant's representative to do so.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carried. Recommend preliminary plat. This time, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Time. At this time, we'll have Mr. Catan present an amendment to Chapter 39, the zoning, and increase setback distance drive aisle width for off-street garages.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is the amendment that I spoke of last meeting. This amendment to increase the setback distance from the current 24 feet between perpendicular garages, and namely what I'm talking about are ones in our R2 and R3 zones, mainly the apartments that you deal with. Some of the earlier apartments that were built, they have drive aisles only 24 feet. Unless you have a smart car, it's incredibly difficult to make those turns, and what inevitably happens is that most of those units, instead of them being counted as on-street or off-street parking, end up becoming storage units because they become inaccessible by the normal vehicles that we have in our community. So we have seen that over a period of time. We've tried to work with developers. Most have changed their plans if they had the ability to do so. But we feel that we need to have this codified within our zoning code, that they are extended to 30 feet. That should supply the necessary turning movements in order for our bigger trucks and our bigger vehicles to use those. I amended the language to also include structures. The reason for that would be if you had a row of garages and a drive aisle, and then right next to it is the principal structure, that should count as well, because what we're talking about are two vertical structures. Do you have enough maneuverability to be able to turn into them? So I applied it to structure. So I would recommend that you would recommend approval of this so we could bring it forward to City Commission. I'm available if you have any other questions.
Any questions on this presentation? Comments? Is there a motion to approve these changes, recommendations?
I'll move that we approve the changes.
Been a motion to approve. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Ballesteros. Any discussion?
You know, just one thing. When we talked about this last month, I think it was Jason that brought up the issue of the garages themselves. I realize that's a separate issue, but I just wonder if we should be looking at that in the future, some minimum garage size.
That would be the next item after this, to talk about a variety of issues that we had
Okay.
spoken in the last meeting, to see if everybody wants to stick around and have a discussion with respect to that.
Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passed. Recommendation for the amendment. Mr. Coling, did you have anything to say about, I apologize, that the language sounds good? You'll look reviewing it anyway, right?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, the next items, or if you want to, you could adjourn the public portion of the meeting, then we could reconvene if you want to as a work session. That'd probably be the best way of doing it.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn, second? All in favor, aye? Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. We have a work session now. Mr. Patel.
With the new drive aisle width, instead of people backing over the existing sidewalks and the curbs that they do, trying to make those motions. Less chance of owner needing to add additional concrete to areas, and it helps the turning traffic more easily move off the roadway, causing less chance of impacts. Some of the cons on that would be less on-street parking. If you widen your residential driveway width, and that leads less opportunity to park on the street. Less area for street trees and impervious surface. So if you have a 60-foot lot and you now have a 24-foot drive aisle driveway width, and you go 60, that's less grass, that's less trees that you would have. Drivers may have a hard time positioning themselves, as we have talked about, because of the tapering effect. Pedestrians may need more time to reverse the driveway and have higher vulnerability to be struck. You have a wider driveways. Sometimes people will lose track of where their driveway really ends and where that sidewalk is, and people will park more into the sidewalk next to the curb, which will make it so that pedestrian kids have to walk in the streets because they look at that as being a wider area. Those are some of the issues that we do have. So with that, I kind of open up the discussion with respect to that and see where you feel if you have a preference one way or the other.
On the amount of paved surface or covered surface you can have on a lot, that doesn't change, does it?
That would not change, no. And some of these smaller lots, if we allowed a wider driveway width, would probably be prohibited due to the impervious surface standard.
And right now we have, if you have an RV parked on your property, it has to be on some type of a pad. Is that fairly well defined?
No, actually, our code needs to be updated with respect to that. Technically, it says, I think, in a residential area, you shouldn't have RV parking. Nevertheless, 1 out of every 3 people have an RV in this community, and I've never applied it because it's an antiquated zoning requirement, and it's not applicable. It needs to be removed, and it's one of the many items that I'm looking at amending when we come through in a couple of months from now of amending the entire zoning code. But that is one item that just does not make sense within our current community.
And the aprons going into a driveway, are part of them defined as sidewalks? And are our sidewalks defined?
They have an apron, they have a little rise.
If I could, yeah, we have had a lot of discussion on this over the last winter, and it probably comes up, I would say, at least once a month, at least, where a builder or homeowner is requesting a wide driveway, or they construct a driveway without approval and it's wider than our standard. What we did over the winter was we standardized the drawing for it. And when you talk about the aprons and the tapering down from a full sidewalk down to your driveway, what we tried to do to standardize this was said, where you start that taper, it could be 34 feet wide. And the tapers are typically 5 feet to meet ADA requirements, leaving what Ed had said, the 24-foot bottom driveway. If you have a boulevard on your street, the sidewalk doesn't need to meet ADA because it goes straight through. You can taper faster. You could end up with about a 30-foot driveway. But the top width is what we tried to standardize at 34 feet, and it continually comes back. People want 40-foot driveways. People want driveways that just match their garage width, whatever that is. The other argument I had heard to when they have that auxiliary parking area off to the side or a drive aisle back to a detached garage, where that taper occurs with their sidewalk, that's the logical place to put your sprinkler head. And if you miss your driveway by that much, you run over your sprinkler heads and you damage your underground sprinkler system. So it's a continual, I don't want to say a fight, but it keeps getting brought up. I think it does deserve some discussion and possibly some change too.
As a builder, for me, I would like to see the width of the garage plus your pavement. I mean, we're going to allow these people to build 36-foot wide garages. You can't ask them to only have a 24-foot wide entrance to it. And then sphere around it. And then on it, one comment on a 60-foot lot, you're not gonna get more than a double garage on there, which is probably gonna be 24 feet wide, so you're not gonna have that issue. It's these big lots, where you got 100 feet of frontage, and they put a 36-foot garage on there, wide garage. I mean, you only allow a 24-foot curb cut, you know? It's small, I mean, only till about 2 years ago have we ever enforced this. Prior to that, we were doing them as wide as the garage forever, and it was always getting approved. Then all of a sudden, actually, probably when Bill came, it started getting enforced, the 24-foot thing. I mean, we're gonna allow these big garages on these bigger lots, I mean, we have to give them access to them, is my opinion on it. I mean, if you got a 36-foot wide garage and you got a 24-foot cut, you're like backing out like this anyway. I mean, and then you only have a 25-foot setback. So you don't have a lot of room to maneuver back out.
I don't know, there was an article in the paper last week by North Dakota Outdoors about going out and practicing in the parking lot. But, yeah, I understand, and in those streets, those places that have huge frontages, they have actually more curb and gutter anyway. So if you took out some, you're still gonna have a lot comparatively.
I think we're staff, visiting with Leonard over the years about this, they have the issues with it, is people want to cut that all the way over to their side driveway. So they want a 60-foot cut or whatever, so they can back their camper straight in or their boat. I don't agree with that, but I think the curb cut plus the taper's got to be at least the width of the garage. I mean, I think that should be the minimum.
I suppose, as you mentioned, another consideration, I suppose, is we are taking off-street parking away.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. And are people allowed to park on the sidewalk portion? Are the sidewalks defined in most of our streets? Can you park your car so it's hanging over the sidewalk or not? You're not allowed to do that? Not supposed to, or is it?
Hanging over the driveway.
Yeah, if it's your driveway and you say, hey, I'm gonna park, and you see it all the time, people, you have to walk around vehicles
Right.
parked, which would be the sidewalk lane.
Technically, it's not because that is the city's right of way. Nevertheless, it's one thing that we just don't enforce. We got too much on our plates, and I don't think that the public, it's kind of like use some common sense there. It's a respect issue that you would have with the community, normally to do that, because what you do is you require the kids to go in the street, or the people walking go in the street. Well, guess what could happen then? Now they're in the street, now they potentially can get hit for that, but no one has time, with our staff and everything else. It's something that's rarely, if ever, enforced, and it's on the books, and it's just, I would hope as a community that they would look at that and realize that, it's not all about yourself and your property, that, you're part of the community, and be respectful and allow that driveway access to happen as well.
I think the other issue there is, where we have the most issues is the older neighborhoods. You have mountable curbs, and you got the sidewalks against the curb. I mean, I don't think any of the new subdivisions are running into some of these issues. But when you have mountable curb, people are pouring their side driveways all the way up to the curb, back to our view. How do we stop that? I really don't know. I mean, they're backing, they're pouring it right up to the back of the sidewalk, so.
What is the major reason we have these curbs? I mean, I've seen other places where all kinds of curbs, but how come we have these elevated curbs? What's the point? What's the real point? Or is there more than one? Well, a lot of places, the curb is, it's a gradual slope. The water can still run down it, what's the reason for having this curb that goes up this far?
Mr. Chairman, from an engineering perspective, to me, the number one thing is drainage and holding the water within our right-of-way, allowing inlets to function a little better, to have the ability to build up 6 inches of water. Drainage doesn't work very well in an urban section with 2.5-inch curb. There's a lot of other reasons. I think there's pros to having the mountable curb too from a development standpoint. It allows any house layout to be laid out on any property. Driveway can be situated anywhere, and you're fine. But the drainage is really, to me, the biggest engineering issue, and maybe Mr. Jackson has some other issues that he's seen over the years too.
Well, you're driving over them on the curb wherever you want.
Yeah.
And especially if the sidewalk's right up next to it, you see people parking on the sidewalk. It's a safety.
Sure.
The other issue is if you have a vertical curb there, then you have a wheel stop. Mountable, you don't know where that's at, and people will continually drive into there, and they won't know where that's at necessarily, and they'll drive onto their landscaping will die, then they'll put pea gravel there, and then we just have the aesthetic issues.
We had a big fight 25 years ago
Uh-huh.
to get rid of mountable curb. It was a big
Yeah.
The other thing happens is that up until a few years ago, if you had straight curb and you were going to put your driveway in, you had to go and physically take out that 25 feet or whatever. Now they make saws and whatnot that you can cut that header off. It's still
Sure.
costs some money, but it's nothing like it used to be.
Used to be.
Prior, we got to tear out the gutter and everything, report it, and it's a lot more cost effective now, they just sock on it. You know, I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, these boulevard areas, if we're gonna allow these bigger houses to have these bigger garages, and they're not overdoing the impervious requirement, I just don't see why you can't have a driveway to wax your garage, it just doesn't make any sense.
I don't necessarily have an objection to that, and if there's direction from the commission, I could put that as one of our amendments to do that.
I
Take care of
think
that
you're
particular
hearing
issue.
direction, because he's presented a real good reason, and those bigger lots, there's more curb space to start with, so there's still gonna be some off-street parking. Yet those bigger lots, bigger driveways are gonna have more off-street parking too. So probably taking care of two problems right there in one.
What is our maximum garage size?
Well, detached is 1,200 square feet. Now, attached is equivalent to the, is either at or equivalent to the existing primary structure. So if you had a 2,000 square foot structure, you could have a 2,000 square foot garage. Then you could have a 3,000 square foot garage. 2,000 they had it, and that included attached ones, and we were running into problems where you had a bigger house and you went over that, then you wanted to put a little storage building on the side. Yeah, they had 2,000 before. I changed that about 2 years ago to say just detached, but your garage could not be any bigger than the primary structure itself.
Are we strictly talking about, this for discussion, are we strictly talking about single-family homes?
Primarily, yes, yes. I don't know how it really equate to anything else other than single family. Single family and attached, single family.
Well, I think when you get threeplexes, fourplexes, that kind of thing, sometimes you can use some creative things with maybe two driveways and walking around, that kind of thing.
And we tried to address that on certain roads. Perfect example was 15th, where we started doing that, and then instead of a developer coming in and had 3 or 4 lots where you had that ability, and we said, okay, you could do a circular driveway for the 2. Then we started to have people coming in with 1, and then it was like, okay, you only had 1 lot. Well, you have to have access, otherwise there'd be no way to develop it. So that whole scheme kind of got messed up there. That's another thing for us to look at in the future, and not to allow so many road cuts on especially a collector road, where in essence there's certain portions of that road where all it is a continuous driveway.
A good area to look at is State Avenue. I mean, I built a lot over there, I had a lot of other builders over there. For years, it's always been enforced the width of the garage plus your acres. I don't know that I drive around there and see any issues with that ever. I mean, in most of the old State Avenue, the curb's up against the back of the sidewalk up against the back of the curb. So, there's people that try to stretch it and make it as wide as they're driving lane, but I mean, with boulevards, you're not affecting the sidewalk slope, you don't have a crazy slope for people to walk on, so I just don't see that requirement would be a problem for anybody.
I could come back with an amendment to allow it to basically put 2 standards. One would be a minimum standard or a maximum, a minimum of Well, I'll have to figure out the language, but basically a small lot, no more than 24, because you don't need it, except if you're going to have garages going to be at, whatever that distance is, whichever one is greater, something to that effect, and I can work on the language. The next issue I'd like to bring up is garages, where should we specify the dimensions for garages? And I would be very comfortable of doing that and saying a single car garage is a 12 by 24, a double is minimums of 24 by 24, something to that effect. I want to get your opinion on there.
I think so. I mean, somewhere it should be fairly well defined. I don't, you're still going to have some of those exceptions. Someone's going to want to say, well, I don't want to go to the full 24, but whatever. I've got a motorcycle and whatever, or something. They're going to ask for variances or whatever. But
right.
I think you're on the right track of trying to define that.
We're looking at R1 only.
That would, well, it actually applied probably across the board, for the most part. I don't see why it would not.
I don't know, I'm guessing not what are they making this guy? 20 by 20 or something?
I've seen them just for one, just the units that are 10 by 20, and you and I both noted those things don't work. Yeah. 12 by 20, they don't make them any longer than 20, and the problem with 20 is that garage door has to stay open if you want to get your groceries out of the trunk or the back of it. There's no way, because your vehicle is all the way up front on that, and if you have any storage in the rear of it, there's no way you can get your vehicle in there. So it almost, if we allow that design with normal storage of items that you may have, Christmas trees, things like that you don't want to have in your apartment, you want to put in your garage, it almost makes it so that you can't use that garage as a garage. And therefore, what happens, you park on the street, and then you affect your neighborhood, or you park in those parking spaces that they may have free. So we've kind of defeated the purpose. That garage should not be counted as a parking unit. It could be in addition, but it should not be counted as one of your required one, because it's really not being used that way.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do in the situation with staggered triple, where you have a 22 by 24 portion and 12 by 24?
I don't have an answer for you right now. Right now, that's just too much math for me to figure out.
You're going to see that a lot. That's a footprint, though.
Yeah.
So you'd be, so the depth you wouldn't report
On that third stall,
the depth could be less. Yeah, because a lot of triple garages are 32 foot wide. A lot of times you get a 22-foot stall,
Mm-hmm.
or a 20-foot stall, but 24 deep, and a lot of times you'll have 12 by
Right.
22 foot.
I think, we're looking at primarily for these to be, most of your houses, they have two cars. If you want to do a third one and make that a little bit smaller, I think there's probably some latitude for that, because that's a preference issue.
I'm total agreement on the 12 by 24 and 24 by 24. I mean, that's not even that. Not really. When you
No.
I mean, because I see some of these apartments, those have to be 20 by 20. You're not getting two cars.
Absolutely.
No.
Absolutely. And you've got to factor in, most of your apartment units don't have a lot of storage, and they anticipate people using the garages as storage for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So there would be a general consensus to make a recommendation with respect to garages, if I'm understanding everybody correctly.
Yep.
Okay. The other issue I want to touch back on is smaller lot sizes. I've talked to some of the developers, talked to Jason recently, and he's looking at bigger lot sizes on one of his developments. Some of the other developers are. We still have Barron's Vista out there that I think wants to move forward next month with those smaller lot sizes. So the question is, do you feel comfortable under certain circumstances, and it's something that we could craft, to allow smaller lot sizes than what we have, or do you just want to stick to your guns as you've done in the past and say, no, we really think that 7,500 square feet is what R1 should be, and 7,000 square feet for R2 lots?
Myers, and they're saying they have to keep out in town on a 7,500 square foot lot. They're having a hard time selling it because people want to see a bigger lot and stuff like that. So they said, you know, they don't really want to see it going that direction because they're having trouble selling those lots. And I said, you know, I came from Las Vegas, and other people that come from other places, as over time they'll get more used to that because, you know, houses in those areas are on smaller lots. But then kind of the flip side of that was that the economy is doing better in other places, so those people may not be coming. But then they said, well, they're still working on, you know, those people still will continue to come no matter what. So it's going to kind of be, they were thinking maybe half of them they could sell at those smaller lot sizes, but they're going to even have to increase those to maybe, you know, 10,000 square feet, starting to get into that quarter-acre lot or fifth-acre lot. So that's just kind of what I was hearing yesterday in meetings. So it's kind of both ways. They're going to have, you know, an easy time selling half of them and a difficult time selling the other half. So as people here in Dickinson upgrade, they don't want to go to a smaller lot in a bigger house. They want a bigger house on a bigger lot. So
And that's a preference, and I've been around different jurisdictions, and some of them say, no, we want to have it. You know, we are our community. That's how we've developed. That's how we want to retain that. And other ones have allowed the flexibility to allow a developer to come in with a unique product, you know, a unique style design building that they feel would work with a small percentage of the public that would be looking for that. Not everybody wants to have that. You know, on my side, I'm always leery of, okay, I want to provide reasonable, what I call reasonable development regulations, but I don't want to disincentivize the development industry of coming up with something unique and creative. And, you know, is it something that we feel strongly about? If it is, great. If it's something kind of lukewarm and said, well, you know, we're open to ideas, well, why not let the development community propose something? And then you make a decision on that instead of saying absolutely no way with respect to that. So I don't know where you're at, and just like to get your feel.
Go ahead.
When we got the Meadow Hills plat in our packets, one of the first things I looked at to see what the lot sizes were. And they're nice-sized lots. They're you know, giant. They're pretty good-sized lots. I think we might be getting another plat here that has really nice-sized lots. And I find myself liking that. Having said that, I'm still open, I think, to some small percentage of a development allowing a certain amount of the R1 need some different kind of design, some different kind of housing on smaller lots. I think it might make it a little bit easier for a developer to get started in a subdivision, and if it does lower the price of some housing. I think we need to at least look at it. I don't know what the detail of what you would write would be. Has anybody been up to North Bismarck? I don't know how to describe it. It's west of 83, north of Walmart, and west of 83. There's an area in there that's got some little like cabins, little teeny homes, little teeny lots. I don't know how well they sold, and I don't know what they sold for, but interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And they look nice.
I think it's good, and I don't think we should be prohibitive in that, and especially if the economy, if the developer, if there's a market for it, it should be allowed. Because I know my son still owns a home in Henderson, Nevada, which is just a suburb of Las Vegas, and I would bet if that lot is 6,500 square feet, they're lucky. But they're nice homes. They've got these two-car garages, which are, I mean, you got to wiggle to get in and out of them. But there's no curbs. And there's people putting swimming pools in their backyards. They have, I mean, got a 22-inch mower, you can walk around and mow your grass one time. And they're full. They're nice places. And there's people that want to live there. And they fit them in there on those lots. They have a really nice second story on them. They've built the house is consumed just about the front part of the lot. You've got the driveway, couple patches of grass, and a garage will fit 2 cars, but they're occupied.
The thing I think you see on those developments a lot of times, however, is more open space. So does that take us right back to where we started? You see more
Yeah,
open space.
it's not so far to some park, not so far to park areas, nice schools, golf courses, too. I mean,
Right.
they're accessible, you know, close
And that-
by.
And that's true. I mean, normally in other communities, the price of land is not 20, 30, 50% higher than it really should be long-term wise because of speculation and high demand. And you would normally have smaller lot sizes, but they would include open space. So it kind of balances out in the long run. Instead of having each lot having a little more space, a little more yard, each lot has smaller yard, but you have more combined usable space that is within walking distance, which makes a lot of sense for kids, for people that like to use a bigger area. You combine the space or aggregate the space together. Here, that's not something that I have entertained at this point because the cost of land is so incredibly expensive that if we did our PUD ordinance where we would allow that, and traditionally you'd say 10 or 20% of that land has to be open space to be taken care of by the HOA, not the Parks District. That's just part of your development. Wouldn't have anybody do it because that 20% is the amount of money that they're spending in extra to buy that land initially to develop. So when things slow down, yes, we would come back with a modification probably to our PUD ordinance to require open space with that, but at this point, that doesn't work. So I'm looking at small lot sizes without any additional open space. And how do you feel about that?
See, and I'm coming from left a community where we rewrote our ordinances to accommodate future development. The lots had to be bigger because the existing lots in town were smaller and people were parking pickups on their front lawns and there were campers beside the house and it was just a clustered mess. And so we rewrote saying, no, the lots have to be bigger.
Ed, would we be in danger of, if we just say, well, we'd reduce the minimum lot size from 7,500 to, I think 5,500 was a number we had thrown out a few meetings ago. If you leave that range from 5,500, or maybe say 6,500 to 7,500, still fair game, are we just going to condense and have the problems you spoke about, Ms. O'Brien? Condense what we're still getting right now and just condense the lot size, and we still have houses and everyone's minimum setbacks everywhere, and I like the idea of it. I think we've seen proposals from several developments on smaller lot sizes that look really good, but I don't want to have the same thing just pushed into a somewhat smaller lot to try and capitalize on, you know, adding 5 or 10 more lots to their subdivision. If you're going to do something, I guess where my head's going is it a completely different zoning classification, R1A, and you have, you know, some of the subdivisions we'd seen had alleys in them to accommodate some of the off-street parking, garbage pickup, things like that. So we're not just trying to, you know, reinvent the same R1 wheel and just get more density out of it.
That some of those younger people kind of come into those. I know at MDU we have a lot of younger guys that, you know, they want to stay here and work, but they're living in subsidized housing. So what it helps to do is have those guys enter the market, build up some equity in some house, and then eventually move on somewhere else. So that maybe we could keep some more young people here. Whenever I was first looking to buy a house in Las Vegas, they had some 3-story houses on, 0 lot lines basically, and that was all we could afford at the time. And so, you know, we kind of looked into that. The neighborhood had mostly young people because we couldn't afford even a bigger house than that. And so it kind of was the entry market for us. Eventually the economy went down and I was able to get a bigger house. But at that time, a lot of those people who still live in those houses to this day, they were younger people who don't mind walking up 3 flights of stairs. You know, they would park 2 cars in the garage, get out, walk up a staircase to the 2nd floor, and then have the bedrooms on the 3rd floor, which I thought, well, you know, I guess is kind of a brownstone type of living. So I think that would be more of the entry market for those young people and how to keep them here. And if that's where we want the future to be, that there will need to be some kind of entry product like that. And then whenever they save up enough equity and, hey, I bought this for 180, I can sell it for 200. You know, I'm done with it. Go to the next one and buy maybe an older house that's a bigger house or on a bigger lot. Then the next young person can come in there and live in that house. How far that will go or how long that will last, I don't know. But it's just, it kind of reminds me of, in Vegas, I rented for 5 years, then looked at houses for 2, then eventually bought one. But it took a while to do that. So I think that other people would be in kind of the same boat. But I know a lot of people don't want to get saddled with a $350,000 mortgage, especially being so young. And, you know, maybe it's just some entry product or something. But also, like Mr. Jackson said, just it allows the developer to be creative with it and kind of see what they come up with, and maybe just a certain amount of them or something like that. But also, you don't want to see them built and half of them occupied and half of them empty. But I guess kind of that's the developer's gamble there.
I think there's a market for it, and I mean, and the economy, the developers will decide that, but I think we should make it available. The issues of, you know, of its parking issues, of other issues that go along with it, with attitude of the people that live there, but it's an issue of the community's or the city's attitude. Are we going to enforce this off-street park, no off-street park, you know, on-street parking? Or is it enforceable? And it is. In other communities, it's enforceable. There's not stuff sitting around on the streets, and you know where you're at, and they, you know, have respect accordingly. I think that issue is just issues of enforceability of codes and ordinances that have to be done for those to exist properly. But I believe there's a market for it. There's people that don't want to maintain a large area, and they don't have, you know, huge 250 pickups and campers and everything, and they don't want it. They want the low maintenance, low upkeep. Maybe they have one car, whatever, and they realize that when they move to that. And that realization, I mean, we live in a different culture here where we see so many boats and RVs and big pickups but we have, I think, a much diverser population living here now and moving here now, that type, especially in a PUD, when things are spelled out, could easily be applied. Where those smaller homes on smaller lots could easily, you know, it would work.
Mr. President, I know that Commissioner Jackson has to leave. He brought up one item, and I just wanted to quickly see if there's any interest. He brought up an item that we had changed our subdivision regulations that stated that if you rezone a property, or clarified the issue, not change, clarified the issue that if you wanted to rezone an unplatted property, you had to plat the property. Commissioner Jackson would like to see if there's an interest or direction for unplatted properties. If you applied for a building permit, that you would have to get that platted. Is there a direction that way? Am I summarizing that correctly?
So, you know, I guess I just have a strong feeling that every piece of property that is ultimately developed should be platted. To take care of easements, to take care of street right-of-ways, to get rid of meets and bounds, descriptions, et cetera, et cetera. So we've covered that now. When somebody comes in for just a zoning request. But there are probably some properties in town that have already been zoned that somebody could come in with a building permit application, and then have no way to require a plat. So,
I agree with you completely, yep. I think they should be platted. I mean, if that's not done, there's a whole lot of problem down the road, a lot.
everybody always thinks of the expense, but, you know, they're probably gonna have to do a lot of survey data.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's platted or not, and that's the biggest part of the expense. These are probably small parcels that were zoned 30 years ago. I couldn't even give you an example, but I'm sure we have some.
Yep.
I could add that as part of our, part of our zoning code amendments to be brought forward in the next several months or whenever we get some time to do so. I don't see it as something that, unless you feel strongly that you want that item to be pushed forward, otherwise I could just put it with the other bundle of items, if that's okay with you. Is there any of the items that we talked about this morning, ones that you see as an urgent need that you want to move forward right away? Otherwise, we'll include them as part of the zoning code amendment bundle.
Very quickly, I noticed on the Meadow Hills plat, they also have a 7-foot right of streets. That was the right of.
That's correct.
And I really like that. The reason being is you get a boulevard that's going to do something.
Mm-hmm.
You have these little, what are they, 4.5 feet. So 70 feet could give you 6. At least it's something that's worth putting a spring in and something to take care of. For snow, or trees.
Yep.
And they did it on their own.
Mr. Gerton, I mean, my opinion is I think all these are urgent, if you have the time. I mean, you've got I think you've got a fairly good consensus in what direction to go, so you've thought about them already. I don't think I think if you presented them, even the next meeting, whatever, you would probably going to get, recommendations to go ahead with it.
This is more of a January, February that I
Oh.
see before I can get all that. I've
Okay.
done my markup, and Steve is looking at some of that, and I would like to have engineering look at it as well, and others. But when I do get a rough draft, I may provide it to you first, and you can look through it. There's no rush on these, and then have a month to kind of look through it and go, I like all these except this one here before I formally bring it your way.
Sure.
That'd probably be a better way to do it now. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very
Anything
much.
else? Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You guys have a good day.